Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. We are continuing on with our study, reading, and commentary of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. We are on Book 2, Chapter 3. If you are just joining us, if you're new to the podcast, welcome and hello. This is a somewhat new segment we have begun, and what I'm doing is, over time, reading through a series of, or at least parts of, some of the books that were very influential to me and offering some commentary and general notes that I think might be interesting or enlightening or any of that sort of thing. So we are now in the second part on the third chapter of Mere Christianity. So it should go without saying that if you're just hopping in now, it would greatly behoove you, if you are interested in this series, to go start at the beginning. It's just not going to make as much sense. I mean, you'll still get something out of it, but obviously it would be much better if you go back and you listen to those first couple of episodes. We got a lot. I'm going to credit that to Mr. Lewis rather than myself for just being such a great thinker and writer that he is. So we're going to continue on now. If you remember what this book has done so far, is it began by looking at our experience of morality and asking some simple questions about it. It really was making a principled philosophical argument from morality to the existence of God. So Lewis isn't starting from any point of revelation. He's not starting by looking at the Bible. He's simply starting from our basic moral experience and asking, is this reliable? Is this real? Are there objective moral norms that attain in the world in which we live? And if so, how can we possibly explain them? What can explain them? And so he develops that argument over a series of chapters. Obviously, it gets us to a general religious worldview, but then he drives it even deeper to see how it can get us to a general religious worldview, but then he drives it even deeper to see how it can winnow the options of possibly true religions, how you can push the moral argument through to actually get us out of things like pantheism or polytheism, if they're even live options for people, and show that whatever this grounding is, whatever this transcendent plumb line is for objective moral norms, it has to be monotheistic in nature. Now, that doesn't give you any one particular religion, but it does narrow the scope, so to speak, of possibly true religions. And then what he did after that is he began to consider some of the specific doctrine and teachings of Christianity that seem to really align with what we know through basic moral experience. And he starts to kind of wedge his way in that way. So that's a very brief and insufficient catch-up. I feel like I'm selling Lewis severely short on that. So please go back and listen to those first couple of episodes. But that's kind of where we're at. We're kind of entering in to the Christian worldview at this point, and we're doing so through a philosophical treatment, through just a rational investigation. And I think that's why Mere Christianity appeals to so many people, because he doesn't just assume that Christianity is true. He gets you to it. He works you to it in a very clear-headed, rational, logical way. And then once we get there, he then begins to explore the implications. So we're kind of in the middle of that right now. So this is Chapter 3. This is called The Shocking Alternative. This is Chapter 3 in Part 2. So I'm going to read this for you. And this, of course, is perhaps the most famous chapter in the book. We'll begin. Okay, here we go. The Shocking Alternative. Christians, then, believe that an evil power has made himself, for the present, the prince of this world. And, of course, that raises problems. Is this state of affairs in accordance with God's will or not? If it is, he is a strange God, you will say. And if it is not, how can anything happen contrary to the will of a being with absolute power? But anyone who has been in authority knows how a thing can be in accordance with your will in one way and not in another. It may be quite sensible for a mother to say to the children, "I'm not going to go and make you tidy the schoolroom every night. You've got to learn to keep it tidy on your own." Then she goes up one night and finds the teddy bear and the ink and the French grammar all lying in the grate. That is against her will. She would prefer the children to be tidy. But, on the other hand, it is her will which has left the children free to be untidy. The same thing arises in any regiment or trade union or school. You make a thing voluntary, and then half the people do not do it. That is not what you willed, but your will has made it possible. It is probably the same in the universe. God created things which had free will. That means creatures which can go either right or wrong. Some people think they can imagine a creature which was free, but had no possibility of going wrong. I cannot. If a thing is free to be good, it is also free to be bad. And free will is what has made evil possible. Why, then, did God give them free will? Because free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. A world of automata, of creatures that worked like machines, would hardly be worth creating. The happiness which God designs for his higher creatures is a happiness of being freely, voluntarily united to him and each other in an ecstasy of love and delight, compared with which the most rapturous love between a man and a woman on this earth is mere milk and water, and for that they must be free. Of course, God knew what would happen if they used their freedom the wrong way. Apparently he thought it worth the risk. Perhaps we feel inclined to disagree with him, but there is a difficulty about disagreeing with God. He is a source from which all your reasoning power comes. You could not be right and he wrong any more than a stream can rise higher than its source. When you are arguing against him, you are arguing against the very power that makes you able to argue at all. It is like cutting off the branch you are sitting on. If God thinks a state of war in the universe is a price worth paying for free will, that is, for making a live world in which creatures could do real good or harm, and something of real importance can happen, instead of a toy world which only moves when he pulls the strings, then we may take it is worth paying. When we have understood about free will, we shall see how silly it is to ask, as somebody once asked me, why did God make a creature of such rotten stuff that it went wrong? The better stuff a creature is made of, the cleverer and stronger and freer it is, then the better it will be if it goes right, but also the worse it will be if it goes wrong. A cow cannot be very good or bad. A dog can be both better and worse. A child better or worse still. An ordinary man still more so. A man of genius still more so. A superhuman spirit best or worst of all. How did the dark power go wrong? Here, no doubt, we have a question to which human beings cannot give an answer with any certainty. A reasonable and traditional guess, based on our own experiences of going wrong, can, however, be offered. The moment you have a self at all, there is a possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God, ability of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God, in fact. That was the sin of Satan, and that was the sin he taught the human race. Some people think the fall of man had something to do with sex, but that is a mistake. The story in the book of Genesis rather suggests that some corruption in our sexual nature followed the fall and was its result, not its cause. What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history. Money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery. The long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. The reason why it can never succeed is this. God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made would not run properly on anything else. Now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel of our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing. That is the key to history. Terrific energy is expended. Civilizations are built up. Excellent institutions devised. But each time something goes wrong. Some fatal flaw always brings the selfish and cruel people to the top, and it all slides back into misery and ruin. In fact, the machine conks. It seems to start up all right and run a few yards, and then it breaks down. They are trying to run it on the wrong juice. That is what Satan has done to us humans. And what did God do? First, he left all of us with conscience. There have been people trying, some of them very hard, to obey it. None of them ever quite succeeded. Secondly, he sent the human race what I call good dreams. I mean those queer stories scattered all throughout the heathen religions about a God who dies and comes to life again, by his death has somehow given new life to men. Thirdly, he selected one particular people and spent several centuries hamming into their heads the sort of God he was, that there was only one of him, and that he cared about right conduct. These people were the Jews, and the Old Testament gives an account of the hammering process. Then comes the real shock. Among these Jews, there suddenly turns up a man who goes about talking as if he was God. He claims to forgive sins. He says he has always existed. He says he is coming to judge the world at the end of time. Now, let us get this clear. Among pantheists, like the Indians, anyone might say that he was a part of God or one with God. Anyone might say that he was a part of God or one with God. There would be nothing very odd about it. But this man, since he was a Jew, could not mean that kind of God. God, in their language, meant the being outside the world, who had made it and was infinitely different from anything else. And when you have grasped that, you will see that what this man said was, quite simply, the most shocking thing that has ever been uttered by human lips. One part of the claim tends to slip past us unnoticed because we have heard it so often that we no longer see what it amounts to. I mean the claim to forgive sins, any sins. Now, unless the speaker is God, this is really so preposterous as to be comic. We can all understand how a man forgives offenses against himself. You tread on my toes and I forgive you. You steal my money and I forgive you. But what should we make of a man, himself unrobbed and untrodden on, who announced that he forgave you for treading on another man's toes and stealing other men's money? Asinine fatuity is the kindest description we should give of this conduct. Yet that is what Jesus did. He told people that their sins were forgiven, and never waited to consult all the other people whom their sins had undoubtedly injured. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all the offenses. This makes sense only if he really was the God whose laws are broken and whose love is wounded in every sin. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply that I can only regard as a silliness and conceit unrivaled by any other character in history. Yet, and this is the strange, significant thing, even his enemies, when they read the Gospels, do not usually get the impression of silliness and conceit. Still less do unprejudiced readers. Christ says that he is humble and meek, and we believe him, not noticing that if he were merely a man, humility and meekness are the very least characteristics we could attribute to some of his saying. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Whoo, C.S. Lewis, always delivering. I mean, what his closing paragraphs are always so powerful. They just resonate. As usual for most of this book, he actually covers a lot of material in short time, and he does it in such a simple way that it's easy to look some of the more powerful points he's making. So, I mean, let's go back because at the beginning he's answering some fundamental, objections, and of course it's the obvious one where we say, okay, some things in this world are truly right and truly wrong, and we argue our way to a source, a transcendent source of perfect goodness. So now we have a problem because if God is all good, then why is there so much bad stuff in the world? Now, part of that he answered in the previous chapters where we talked about the doctrine of privation, where evil doesn't have positive ontological status. We talked about how evil and suffering really amounts to a whole where goodness should be. So I'm not going to repeat that part, but he did answer that, at least answer this question in part in an earlier chapter. Additional explanation, and what he's getting at is essentially what's known as the free will defense. And the free will defense says that part of the reason this world has gone so wrong is because God's plans were never to just make us happy puppets here on earth to begin with. God did not intend for humans just to be a lot of contented, stupid cows that were more or less machines and himself a puppet master. Rather, God's plans are to bring about the maximal amount of goodness. And that makes sense, right? A maximally good being would want to bring about the maximal amount of goodness. But the maximal amount of goodness would seem to have to entail something like love. And because what is possibly higher than that? What is possibly higher than love and the virtues manifest in love? You really can't think of anything. But here's the rub. Here's the snag, he says. Love means nothing if it's not freely chosen. Because any relationship that is forced or coerced isn't really a free, loving relationship at all. So love is really only significant if it is freely willed by the person, an act of self-giving that is freely chosen. That is a really good thing. It's certainly a better thing than creatures just being pre-programmed to act a certain way. And I don't think anybody would sincerely deny that. But there's a problem with that. For free will to have any significance, for people to freely choose to do something good, there has to be a real alternative to not choose that, or to choose otherwise. Otherwise, again, you're not really your free will isn't significant. You really haven't developed virtue or the virtue of love. If all I can choose is one option, right? Then I don't really have. There isn't the sufficient conditions for free will to even mean anything at that point. And Lewis makes that point in there. So he says, at the same time, while it's not God's direct will that all this evil and sin goes on, it is his will that we be free and that we freely enter into a loving, saving relationship with him. So God permits this evilness. He permits suffering. He permits human sin because he has morally sufficient reasons for doing so. Now, we don't have to know what those reasons are or how all of those will play out. And we can't. We're not omniscient. We don't see the divine masterpiece in its entirety. But here's what we know. We know that God is all good. We know that God is all loving. We know that God would want to create a world where something supremely good can happen. And, of course, love freely chosen is clearly one of those supremely good things. So he permits and allows, through the existence of a sort of fixed playing board, right? That's the other part of it. It's free will is one thing, but it has to operate in an environment. Souls have to also be able to interact with one another. So there has to be kind of like a fixed playing board. Think of chess or checkers, right? I can only play chess or checkers with you if there's a fixed board where there's certain rules and we can have meaningful interaction. If the board changed every second and the rules change every second, there could be no interaction. So part of free will means having to play according to a more or less fixed board, and that's where we have the sort of rigidity and predictability of nature and natural laws. Now, mixing in with that comes all kinds of opportunity for suffering, unfortunately. The fire that warms you can burn you. The water that quenches your thirst can drown you. Now, occasionally within this fixed board, rules are lifted. And this would be the occurrence of a miracle. That's what a miracle is. And by the way, what I'm talking about here, Lewis goes into great detail in his book Miracles. So if you want an even deeper, more philosophical arguments against determinism and arguments philosophically for miracles, head to his book Miracles after this. So he's giving a traditional free will defense, and he's showing that God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing these things to go on because some greater good is being drawn out of them. But still, we must recognize that things clearly have gone wrong. They really have, and actually, the Christian worldview helps us to really make sense of this. It helps us to do a lot of things other religions can't. Right. So in the pantheistic religions, if you want to believe that good and evil are just kind of illusions or looking at things that, kind of from different perspectives, that's really problematic because I don't think anybody at the end of the day wants to say that raping and torturing a small child for fun is just a matter of perspective. Some things we know are really wrong. So Christianity lets us affirm that some things really are wrong, but at the same time, it explains how things went wrong, even though there is an all-powerful God and source of goodness out there who very much despises these wrongdoings, but more or less allows them to occur because because of the necessary conditions of love, human free will, and all these other things. So Christianity provides illumination to the human condition in a way that virtually no other religion can. Really, no other religion can. Even the other Abrahamic religions can't quite do it to the fine degree of articulation that Christianity can. So that's the first part of this chapter that he's arguing. Again, and like he does it so concisely, and that's part of his talent. He does it. I mean, I'm sitting here rambling on and on. He just kind of packs it right in. That it's almost easy to miss it and not fully appreciate it. I guarantee he probably read like 40. I guarantee he probably read like 40 to 100 books on the subject of free will and determinism, all this and that, just to write these couple of paragraphs. That's how concise he is. And of course, we know that about Lewis. He was a great intellectual. He really took the time to study and know his stuff. He wasn't just some guy who made stories up. There's so much to admire about this man's life. It's incredible, and that's part of the reason I wanted to highlight them. And then he gets on to what I said was his famous argument. And this famous argument is sometimes called the trilemma argument. Now, it didn't start with C.S. Lewis. This argument goes way back. I mean, you can find some of the earliest like Catholic and Christian apologists. Like we're talking like 2nd century, 3rd century. You can see that people using this device to argue for the truth of Christianity. And it's essentially either or bad man is how it was originally phrased. Either God or bad man. Like you can't look at Christ any other way if you're being honest about it. Now, Lewis poses it as the Lord, liar, or lunatic trilemma. And what he's saying is like when you really pay attention to Jesus and when you honestly look at what we know about Jesus historically, you can't try and just say that he's a good moral teacher or a spiritual guru, because anybody who claimed the things that Jesus claimed, who said the things that Jesus claimed, and wasn't who Jesus said he was, would either have to be a very sick man indeed, sick in the head most probably, or the dumbest but also possibly worst charlatan of all time. Now, the dumbest and worst charlatan of all time, like that doesn't make sense because of all the types of people you would try to convince that you were God, the Jewish people have such a clear and well-defined conception of the radical distinction between the creator and the created than the Jewish people. If you were to try and push this through in certain Hindu religions or Eastern religions, they'd be like, oh, yeah, we're all quote-unquote God. We all kind of participate in that. But Lewis drives the point. He says that's not what he's saying. Jesus is a Jew. He affirms Judaism. He said he's not there to abolish the law. He's there to fulfill it. So he's speaking in a very strictly and specifically Jewish context and to a Jewish audience. So he's like, we have to recognize this. We have to be honest about this and see just how radical these claims are. So if he was a charlatan, then he was the dumbest one to ever exist, because one, he would have nothing to gain by this. In fact, everything that he could stand to gain, he did when he got nailed to the cross. So like there's no conceivable motive for trying to do this. And the chances that people would ever believe him, specifically this audience, are just like, that people would ever believe him, specifically this audience, are just like, you'd have to be a real idiot. You would have to be a real idiot to try and pass this off on the Jewish people. And nobody thinks of Christ as an idiot. Nobody thinks of him as a charlatan. People who aren't Christians but think about Jesus, even if not that deeply, the basic intuition is to say that he was a great moral teacher in some sense. But then Lewis twists the screws. He says, you cannot say that. This man made radical claims about himself. He said, I'll quote here again, among these Jews, there suddenly turns up a man who goes about talking as if he was God. He claims to forgive sins. He says he has always existed. He says he is coming to judge the world at the end of time. and then he really kind of presses the point on the claims that Jesus made to forgive sins. And of course, this is a famous passage in Scripture, but who but God can forgive sins? Who but God can forgive sins? And how fundamentally radical this was, and what it implied, and the very nature and character of Jesus. In one sense, claiming to be meek, claiming to be humble, but then making these claims that either he really was who he said he was, or he was a madman or something worse, as Lewis says. And so you can't try and kind of go back through the historical record of Jesus and look at him and try and paint him any other way, because everything we know about Jesus, factually about Jesus, is inextricably bound up with his claims, his actions, and his deeds. So we have to make a choice. And I think the most powerful thing about this about what Lewis says is actually the last line, right? The last couple of lines. I'll say it again. Is we are stuck in an actual legitimate trilemma here. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open for us. He did not intend to. Of course he didn't intend to. Of course he didn't. Right? Of course he wouldn't leave that open. Like that just makes sense, doesn't it? Like if God were to incarnate, and if Jesus really was who he claimed to be, then this seems exactly like the type of situation that eerily suspicious, doesn't it? Like there's really, if you're looking at it honestly, there's no way we can interpret this in an ambiguous sense. Not if we're being honest about it, not if we're being serious about it. We really are caught here. And this argument has stood the test of time. It really has. So, I mean, from the earliest Christian apologists trying to make the case, Lewis kind of brought it back into the popular mainstream. And then really the only other kind of way that you could try and escape this is to try and claim that Jesus is some type of mythical character. But that has been exploded by the historical sciences. The vast majority, I think even on Wikipedia it says that pretty much every classicist, historian, New Testament scholar agrees that Jesus was not a myth. Not only did he exist, but there are certain facts about Christ's life, death, and resurrection that are grounds to rationally, reasonably, and responsibly affirm that he was who he said he was. That doesn't mean, and we've done episodes on this, of looking at the historical case, looking at the historical data for the empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances, and the origin of Christian belief, and then just doing as historians do and saying, okay, what is the best explanation of these facts? Because these are the facts that the vast majority of historians agree on. It doesn't mean that they agree that he was a son of God or actually rose from the dead, but they agree on the empty tomb, that people legitimately and sincerely believed, individuals and groups over various times, circumstances, and locale, to have seen Jesus risen bodily from the dead, and that somehow suddenly the origin of this sprung up almost out of nowhere and then rapidly began to spread. So then you have to ask, what explains this? How can you best explain this? And as I've argued on previous episodes, and many other people such as N.T. Wright, one of the most preeminent historians and scholars, New Testament scholars, said that as a historian, he cannot make sense of these data points unless Jesus really did rise again and leave an empty tomb behind him. There is no acceptable or adequate naturalistic explanation for this. So between the kind of radicality of the nature of Jesus and then the historical case that could be made for the resurrection, the point that I would like to press is that for anybody who's willing to look into this, there is more than enough grounds to reasonably and responsibly assent to the truth of Christianity. Can you prove it? Like, you can prove that 2 + 2 = 4? No, you cannot. You cannot do that. But I don't think that. But I don't think that God would want to set it up that way, and that's part of the reason that we say faith is a virtue. So faith is trusting in that, and so much of having a relationship with somebody really does involve matters of faith. You think of your spouse, your husband, or your wife, and how faith is a good thing. It is. Like, I have good reason to believe that my wife loves me, and I act accordingly. I can't prove that like I can prove 2 + 2 = 4, but that is a good thing, and that's good for our relationship to have that trust there. But it's also based on good reasons and evidence. It's not a blind faith. It's not just like a leap of faith. It's like a step of faith. It's like a step of faith. I have good reason to affirm this. I would say that the same is true for the truth of Christianity and the resurrection, based on what Lewis is saying and other arguments, that it's above reason. It's an extension of reason. It's not below it, and it's just a little step. It's just a little step that you have to take. So I'm going to leave that there. I think that one chapter is probably enough for this. Something to reflect on. Of course. Powerful stuff. Thanks for tuning in. Well, it's powerful stuff to me. I hope that you're getting something out of this and you're enjoying it. If so, please help to support the podcast. Share the episode. Give us a review. And we'll talk.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.